as well. So welcome to Training Tuesday, everybody. It's so exciting when we have some technical glitches, but we've got them covered and we're ready to roll. So I am Heidi Reese with the Dayton Superior Marketing Department. I'm sitting here with Chuck Hoke, who is in the National Training Manager as well. And Todd Fraker is on the phone, who will be presenting the Bondbreaker. So you know that every Tuesday we do Tuesday. And we're excited that you were able to join us for today's topic. First, let's discuss some housekeeping. It sounds like everybody's already muted, so that is fantastic. We want to do that so that we don't have any other outside disturbances to take away from others' experiences to learn. But don't let that stop you from asking any questions. You can do so through the Zoom functionality in the chat area. And at the very end, I will ask those of Todd and the group here, and we can get those answered for you. So also, as you noticed, the webinar is being recorded so that you can re-listen to it later, or you could send it to someone who might benefit from this Bondbreaker presentation. And as you've heard, we have a great presenter for you today, and he knows the ins and outs of chemicals. I personally like to call him Mr. Bondbreaker. I hope he knows that. I'm excited that he will be going over this topic with us today. So Todd has been with Dayton Superior for about 39 years now, and I'm sure many of you on the call have talked or met with him at some point. He isn't just great at the chemical world, but he's also worked and sold just about everything that Dayton Superior has to offer. He's been a dealer sales manager, a regional sales manager, a senior chemical manager, and now he is our national chemical manager. He has a bachelor's of science in chemical engineering and has written many of our training modules that we use today. So during our half-hour session, we're going to learn what Bondbreakers are, their compatibilities, and how to select the right ones for you, and so much more. So Todd, go ahead and teach us what you know. And also, as you see on the screen before Todd starts, this presentation is intended for training purposes. And you can refer to DaytonSuperior.com for any technical or safety data sheets.
Thank you, Heidi, for that magnanimous introduction. Today we're going to discuss Bondbreakers. It'll be about a 30-minute presentation, so if you can hold your questions to the end, but we will have time for some questions. The objectives of our training today include the importance of curing our casting slabs, Bondbreakers and compatible curing membranes, stack casting, fly ash considerations, weather considerations, waste slab or rat slab considerations, selecting Bondbreaker, concrete and Bondbreaker placement, and then ultimately painting of the tilt-up panels. Next, please. What are Bondbreakers? A Bondbreaker is a material used to prevent adhesion of the newly placed concrete and the substrate. In essence, they're more of a waterproofer. That's kind of the basic chemistry. If you waterproof the casting slab, you're going to prevent the ingress of freshly poured concrete, cement fines, Portland cement, etc., into the casting slab. Bondbreakers are often referred to in conjunction with construction joints or when pouring PCC pavement. And in that case, we would look at a different product than the Bondbreakers are currently marketed. We look at a white wax cure, other bond breaking type materials. And Bondbreakers we're referring to today are used exclusively in tilt wall construction. Thank you. Next. All right, why use a Bondbreaker? Well, because you want your walls to come up and not stick to the slab. Pretty simple. Next. Our goal is to get the panels up, to get them up as cleanly as we can without a lot of residue. We don't want to have any pullouts from the casting slab sticking to the wall, which will require more cleaning and labor on the contractor's part. And we certainly don't want a panel stuck so hard that you have to break it off to get it off the slab. And by the way, I'd say most of these pictures have been collected by us over about 30 years of being in the Bondbreaker tilt-up business. So firsthand knowledge. I don't think, I'm like the farmer's guy. I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. So next, please. So it all starts with the casting slab. The casting slab needs to be cured well and needs to be tight and well consolidated before the application of the Bondbreaker. Because we don't want to have permeability or density problems with the casting slab. We don't want to have weak compressive strength in the casting slab, which can lead to peeling of the surface with the tilt-up panel. We don't want to have cracking in the casting slab. That can lead to water ingress and a locking mechanism. We don't want to see dusting on the casting slab. That will come up with the walls. We want to maintain the abrasion resistance, and we want to maintain the durability as specified by the engineer. So that's why we cure our slabs. What are some of the Bondbreaker and cure compatibility issues? Water-based SureBuilt J6WB and Maxi tilt can be used as a cure per ASTM C309 on a modified steel trowel finish. They do meet the C309 water retention. You can also substitute other materials in lieu of the Bondbreaker for a cure, which in case one would be our dissipating cure, our J11W. Allow it to dry and then go ahead and place the Bondbreaker over the top of it in the panel areas. Or you can use one of our water-based curing seals, our C309J18, 1315 J22WB, 309EF, and that's 309EF is approved VOC level in California. It's a very rigorous VOC level. And then the 1350, and I say carefully because it's a high solids material. So if you're spraying it out and using it as a cure, make sure you use a very high pressure sprayer and get those droplets to atomize and coalesce into a nice continuous membrane. You don't want to put Bondbreaker over little droplets of material that have dried in place. Next, please. So as I stated earlier, a successful outcome of Bondbreakers rely on a well-finished, well-cured casting slab, always. That's always been the case. All right, when working with solvent-based materials, you can use the Bondbreaker as a cure. Again, our J6 is tested on a hard steel trowel finish. It does meet the water retention requirements of ASTM C309. But in lieu of using a solvent-based Bondbreaker as a curing compound, you can certainly default to one of our solvent-based curing seals, J20UV, J22UV, J23UV, or the LVOC equivalents, which are available in Colorado and Canada as a curing seal underneath the solvent-based Bondbreaker. So rules of the road, I can't tell you how often in a week I get calls from folks about, can I do this? Could I? I'll start by stating we're most comfortable keeping the Dayton Superior products in the same family. So Dayton Curing Seals with Dayton Bondbreaker, but we all know that's not always the case. So the rules of the road include water-based Bondbreaker can go over any water-based cure, preferably a Dayton Superior product. A solvent-based Bondbreaker can go over solvent-based cure, again, preferably a Dayton Superior product. That should actually be cure and seal. There is no solvent-based cure left in the market. Water-based Bondbreaker over solvent-based cure and seal is okay, but never ever put a solvent-based Bondbreaker over the top of a water-based cure and seal or curing compound. I've seen too much of those membranes pick up with walls and leave the walls pretty ugly. Next, please. All right, so our low VOC solvent-based Bondbreaker is not compatible with other cures or curing seals. It has a very hot solvent in it, so it should always be used as the cure coat. That's just a rule of the road on that one, and that one stands apart by itself. So the J6 LVOC, when used in tilt-up, it should be used as the curing compound in addition to the Bondbreaker compound. Stack casting is common, especially when site space is limited. I've found over the years that people do not pay attention to the upside, backside of the panel face that they're casting against. but they need to be just about of the same finish that the casting slab needs to be, not just, you know, broomed or a light hand trowel, but even a small walk behind is good. Don't forget proper curing and Bondbreaker application of the upside. Don't forget to cure the backside of those panels. Attention to finish on stack casts is often overlooked. I do recommend curing with a cure and seal, not a cure or a Bondbreaker, simply to give you that added benefit of having that membrane in place. And stack casts do have a tendency to stick, particularly when you go 2, 3, 4, 5 high. I've seen them as high as 5, but that was on a very robust casting slab. Usually the engineer won't allow that. He'll typically allow 2 or 3 at most. Next, please. All right, waste slabs often cast off the side of the building because there's not room on the actual floor area of the building. There's some considerations to bear in mind. The mass of the waste slab is always much less relative to the tilt wall panel. You're talking about an 8-inch thick wall panel. You're talking about a rat slab that's typically 3 inches. Finishing, again, has to be paid attention to, and application of adequate Bondbreaker is even more critical on those than even on the interior of the building. TCA, the Tilt Up Concrete Association, recommends a minimum of 3 inches on waste slab or rat slab construction. And I'm going to add another little piece to that. Consider reinforcement of the rat slab. At minimum, consider a mesh. And if you've got number 3 or number 4 bar, probably number 3 would be adequate on a 12 by 12 reinforcement. That will hold that whole thing together. So if there's any chance of that rat slab sticking to the tilt wall panel, it will be a much larger mass when it's contained with some reinforcement. Next, please. All right, here's a typical failure. Unfortunately, I took this picture of a rat slab that was about 2.5 inches thick. It came up with a wall. It was not reinforced. It was not cured. It was not finished well. Next picture. And this is what the casting slab looked like: a sandy base and, you know, no reinforcement. So that's a typical failure mode on a rat slab or a waste slab that hasn't been done well. Next, please. Fly ash, controversial, used a lot. Yes, it is used a lot. Is it out there in the marketplace? Yes. We're still going to see it as long as we're burning coal in this country. Although I understand that a lot of power plants have moved to natural gas, so we're seeing, of all things, shortages of fly ash. So it is considered pozzolanic. It does contribute to lead points because it's a recycled material. It's used simply to get lead points for the building and to reduce the cost of concrete. It does have a few advantages, but what happens when using fly ash in concrete mixes, particularly on casting slabs, fly ash is very particular about how it behaves. Water tends to preferentially hydrate it over the Portland cement molecules, so that's the first problem. The strength gain is slower when using fly ash versus regular 100% cement. And oftentimes the finisher will get a false bleed reading because fly ash inhibits the bleed water coming to the surface, and they will start finishing prematurely. Now what happens is you seal in the bleed water right underneath that top layer of paste, and that ends up being a weakened surface zone that without enough Bondbreaker on the slab, sometimes that just peels right up. And we're talking 1/8 of an inch, maybe 1/4 of an inch that can come up with a wall. So you got to pay attention to fly ash. Make sure you get your curing compound on there at the least. Make sure it's on there in a hurry, not at the end of the day after they've been pouring all day. Go ahead. All right, we all know how weather affects tilt-up construction. Rain, snow, even hail. I remember getting called out to a job about 4 years ago here in Denver, and we had just gotten an hellacious hailstorm that caused upwards of $1 billion worth of damage, and it had just pulverized the Bondbreaker. And the contractor calls up and he said, "Do you think I could pour on this?" And I said, "Not on your life." So they had to pick the cages up and reapply the Bondbreaker. So that's a hail side story. When things are cool and damp, it will slow down the Bondbreaker drying time, but Typically, that's a good condition for casting tilt-up panels because things are kind of damp and it's a great environment for concrete. Under hot and dry conditions, we have to deal with paying attention to surface drying, surface crazing, surface cracking. All this dryness leads to ingress of water from the freshly poured tilt wall panel. So curing is critical to the casting slab. So it may be more than 2 coats of Bondbreaker. If the slab is drinking it up, our data sheets are very clear that 2 coats are minimum, but it may need another coat or 2. It's cheap insurance, and you consider the cost of a damaged panel and the cost of fixing it. Next, please. Rain, clean and recoat if necessary. The solvent-based materials do a pretty good job of resisting rain, but if it's a continuous hard rain, it will start damaging the layer. You'll start to see the so-called bathtub ring effect on the slab. You might want to go check it. We've got some more pictures of what bad slabs look like after they've been beat up with rain a little bit. With the water base, it tends to kind of push the Bondbreaker out to the edge of the panel. It can also lead to some more kind of that heavy Bondbreaker at the edge can lead to retardation at the edges of the panel as well. So if it rains hard and there's a question, then they should probably clean the excess water out of the panel, get rid of any loose flakes by blowing it out. And that's what I would call an adequate cleaning job before more Bondbreaker is applied. Next, please. Hot, dry, and windy conditions will increase slab drying. We all know that, resulting in increased permeability, which we discussed, and that pulls water out of the freshly poured panels and cement fines, and it will absorb rapidly. So when finishing the slab, usually every contractor has an evaporation retardant available on the slab, whether it be ours, J74, or someone else's. Follow ACI 305 for hot weather concrete practices. Try to keep things cool. Try to do it early in the day before the heat of the day. Curing immediately is very important. That doesn't mean on a 1 million square foot building on a 100,000 square foot pour, you wait till 3:30 in the afternoon in the heat of the day if you started pouring at 8 o'clock in the morning. It means try to keep up the curing. We oftentimes recommend they mist or cool the concrete with misty water right in front of the Bondbreaker going down, simply because it reduces the permeability of the concrete and it reduces the temperature. When temperatures are sustained, we've done this in Vegas over the years and some of the other really, really hot markets like Texas, we actually flood the panels with water prior to casting to reduce the amount of osmotic effect, which is the transfer of water from the panel into the casting slab. Now, the good news is we're in 2022 and most of these slabs are done with laser screeds, and so we don't have any bird baths or any areas where the water could hang back and change the water cement ratio at the panel casting slab interface. So that's another trick in the book. Next. Concrete consolidation is important. Move the concrete with shovels or rakes, not with a vibrator. That vibrator bouncing along the slab will oftentimes disrupt the Bondbreaker. You end up with little sticky spots. Vibrating screeds are always a good choice. Use a short head vibrator sparingly to move the concrete. Over vibration can cause segregation and honeycombing. You get your large rock drop into the bottom and all your fines coming to the top. And last but not least, often overlooked, do not scour the casting slab with a pump or the line. Put a piece of plywood underneath that sucker and let the concrete flow down off of that, and then move the plywood along with the end of the pump coming off the concrete pump. I can't tell you how many times I've seen job sites, they're out on the job, the guys are mucking, and they got a hold of that hose, and they got it down about a foot away from the slab. Well, what do you think that thing's doing at that velocity? It's basically sanding off the Bondbreaker. So you want to provide some means of deflection to keep the trim or the hose, if you will, from blasting a hole in your Bondbreaker coats on the slab. Next, please. It's assumed there'll be a hard trowel finish. Anything else, you might want to talk to us. pretty straightforward. 2 coats of Bondbreaker minimum, and we capitalize that at right angles. So you walk north-south, you walk east-west with the second coat. Your application rates on the solvent-based materials are about 500 square feet per gallon when used a Bondbreaker coat, times 2, and the water base goes down a little bit less coverage because it tends to make a thicker membrane. So that goes down to 400 square feet per gallon. If it's on the slab, it's coming up the wall. Good hygiene on a tilt project is very important. I've always felt that if I go to a job site and I see lots of trash on the slab, it means that somebody's not paying attention. So in the upper left-hand picture, you see cigarette butts and sawdust, and they've got their Bondbreaker up on the slab. They're filling their sprayers up on the slab. They're just doing all kinds of messiness, and guess what? That will tilt with the wall. So good hygiene is very important. It's not the Bondbreaker's fault. It's just those are the artifacts that are going to come up with the wall. Next, please. All right, we already discussed the right angle piece. Straightforward. All right, so how do we evaluate Bondbreaker? Visual inspection. You're going to see a little bit of a color change with the solvents. You can always do a water bead test, and it's going to have a waxy feel if it's a water-based material, and it's going to be more like flypaper if it's a solvent-based material. It will also feel soapy, waxy all at once, but you'll feel it on the slab with your finger. Next, please. Very typical. You can see where they've used joint compound for filling in the saw cuts. That's okay. That's going to stay white. But the Bondbreaker application in the upper part of the picture is a little bit light. I would consider inspecting that and applying more because it's obviously soaked into the slab. The lower half looks pretty good, nice and dark, the way we like to see it. We talked about application and how important that is. Here's an example of a very poor spray job with a Syatem whose nozzle is clogged. Yeah, I've got enough Bondbreaker down there, but I tell you what, those panels are not going to look good. You've got areas where it's dried, it's been too thick. The upper right, you can see the rust marks that will transfer up with the wall. So, just be aware of the fact that rebar left out in the rain for a long period of time will start to rust and drip that rust down the slab, and you'll see that gritting. Now, it's not the end of the world. When it's painted, it'll go away, but people freak out when they see that gritted pattern. They go, oh my gosh, what happened? So good sprayers, good hygiene, it's common sense. Anybody who's been in the construction business just knows that these are the things we do. Next. This is a water bead test. You can see these water beads are kind of flat and lazy and kind of soaking in pretty quick. On the next picture, you're going to see what we really like to see, and that's beating up like a freshly waxed car. So that slab has been treated adequately with Bondbreaker. The previous one would be questionable. Next. All right, the good old painter. Painting is the responsibility of the painting contractor and the contractor, not Dayton Superior. We don't clean buildings. We're not responsible for junk picked up with the wall. We're not responsible for any of that. We're simply trying to get the wall up so there's no damage to the concrete. Our Bondbreakers typically require a minimum of 30 to 60 days to begin to oxidize, and that's in constant sun with good temperatures. If you're on the north side of a building and you're in, well, let's take Denver, and you're in the middle of winter, it may take a little bit longer. If you're in the northwest and you've tilted the building, you're gonna have to wait for that building to dry out so that the painter can catch his window and wait for the panels to get down to 5% or below in terms of their moisture content. That's up to the paint contractor. That's not us. Apologize for the noise. All right, next. All right, just as a summary, the Bondbreakers we offer SureLift with dye J6D. It's the workhorse of the industry. The SureLift J6 WB, the water-based, that does not have a dye in it, nor does the Maxi tilt. Both of those are water-based. They spray out and they look white. And the last one is the SureLift J6 LVOC, and that's a very it's a VOC compliant solvent-based material. All these bond breakers, our net coverage this year, we'll probably do about in excess of 100 million square feet of tilt-up. We have a pretty big chunk of the market. We have a couple of major competitors that have a pretty good chunk of the market, but that's a pretty good track record. We've been doing that for, you know, close to 30 years now. So we've done a lot of tilt-up, and don't be afraid to reach out if something doesn't look right or you got a question about something. Next, please. Some of the advantages on the solvent base, again, they're a little bit more resistant to rain wash off than the water-based materials, and they have a little bit better coverage rate. So at 500 square feet a gallon per coat versus the water-based material. The water-based material, they have a dual purpose in how they act as a bond breaker. They have a membrane component and a reactive component. They meet all the VOC regulations in the U.S. and Canada and Southern California. They resist rain and weather if they're put down. Light rains are fine, but you get barn burners. It's going to be, and you get a lot of water in those panels. We're probably going to be talking about maybe having to recoat. The J6WB really does tilt very clean panels without a lot of work for cleaning or power washing prior to sacking and patching. Next. Maxi tilt, same advantages of the J6WB, meets all the VOC regulations, US and Canada. You will see that product mostly down in the southeast part of the country. They resist rain and weather. Again, clean panels. Next one, please. All right, so Bondbreaker does require a little bit of knowledge. It astonishes me that they always put the guy with the least amount of experience on the job site spraying out the Bondbreaker. He should be the highest paid guy in the crew who's done it multiple times, or at least has been trained and properly, you know, how to use sprayers. And, you know, it sounds a little bit colloquial, but it isn't, because Bondbreaker is a small component of the job, and its misuse requires expensive remedies. Cost on tilt wall panels is north of $10 a square foot, and anytime you got to bust one out on a 20 by 30 panel, you're looking at $6 grand or something like that. So a little extra Bondbreaker on a job is not a bad investment.
All right, thank you. I'll take it from here, if that's okay. So that was great, Todd. I just wanted to let you guys know that we are having a Bondbreaker special pricing going on until the end of August. So it's real exciting to learn about this, and then also to know that we have this special going on. So contact your sales representative for details. And again, view the DaytonSuperior.com website for technical data sheets and safety data sheets. At this time, if you have any questions, go ahead and enter them into chat. While anyone who has any questions is doing that, just wanted to extend a big thank you for joining today. We all appreciate that, and just remember, every Tuesday we have them, so you can sign up and put them on your schedule. Doesn't look like there's any questions. Give it just a minute. Also, remember, we're recording, so you can re-listen to it later. I will send out an email a little bit later today letting you know the direct link, but they're always on YouTube, on the Dayton Superior channel, as well as our DaytonSuperior.com website. Just search for product videos. All right, well, it seems like Todd did such a fantastic job for us that there aren't any questions. So I'm going to let you guys go, and I hope that you all have a very happy Tuesday. Thanks for joining.